Stick this in somebody's mouth and it sucks out goo. So usually for mouth we use the rigid tip, just for nose we use the soft tip. So appropriate suction catheter, I selected the rigid tip. Assures that this suction device is working. So I've got this all plugged in, I'm going to turn it on. That works, okay, I'm going to plug this in. Suction works, okay? One thing I want to make sure you guys all understand is that this is a carburetor. If you don't have your finger over the hole, there's no suction because the vacuum gets released at the level of that hole. So if I try to suction with like this, it's not going to work. You have to have your finger over that hole, and now there's suction at the end. Does everybody understand that?
Yeah.
So you only get suction when your finger is covering that hole. So now I'm going to insert the device into the mouth, making sure I don't stimulate the gag reflex, and then you only suction on the way out. So you stick it in somebody's mouth, then you turn on suction and suction as you go out. So I'll show you what I mean by that. Turn it on. Usually cross finger technique again is good. Open their mouth, stick it in. Now I start activating the suction. Suction a little bit on one side, and then come around, stick it in on the other side. Suction a little there on the way out. And hope you get all the goo. One way to help ensure that you're not going to stimulate a gag reflex is to only insert this as far as you can see. You know, really look at the back of their throat and try not to touch the back of their throat with it. In fact, I don't like to go across their throat. I like to suction kind of back in one corner and then take it out and then suction back in the other corner. Rather than back and forth, you're more likely to make them gag if they're semi-conscious.
Is that from personal experience? You've seen that kind of pattern? Okay.
Yeah. And right, I guess maintaining the tip of the, maintaining sight of the tip throughout suction is another, you know, making sure you don't stimulate the gag reflex. So that's really all there is to it. The book will say a lot about how you can only suction for up to 15 seconds at a time. So, you know, you're suctioning, there's stuff in there, you count to 15, or sometimes even they'll just say, hold your breath while you're doing it, because after about 15 seconds of you holding your breath, you kind of feel like you want to breathe. That's your indication that probably the patient also wants to breathe. It's time to stop suctioning, because you're sucking out the oxygen along with everything else. So it can become detrimental to the patient for you to suction for prolonged periods of time. However, if there's still stuff in the airway, you have to keep suctioning, because what's going to happen next? I'm going to take the BDM and blow that into their lungs. So it's one of these things where I know the book says 15 seconds, and if you take National Registry and there's a question about it, the answer is 15 seconds, I'm sure, but in real life, you have to suction until you get everything out. And just know that every second you go past 15, you are depriving the patient of oxygen, you are causing them to be hypoxic. You want to get through it as quickly as possible, but you're doing more harm than good by stopping and ventilating them if there's still junk in their mouth. You're better off taking another few seconds and just getting their airway clear.
Is that something you and your partner discuss, or you just go ahead and...
You're going to do it. You can't ventilate them until you get their airway clear.
Yeah.
You know, if there's a lot of stuff, you probably also want to combine this with tipping them onto their side, helping use gravity to get it out too, as long as there's not C-spine trauma, or cervical spine trauma. But you know, it's one of these things where in real life you just got to get the airway clear. You got to do whatever it takes to get the airway clear. And sometimes it's, you know, whatever, anything short of like holding them up by their foot and shaking them. Okay, nasal suction. So same thing. I've selected the appropriate catheter. I'm going to ensure that it's working. Again, this is the carburetor. It only works when I put it here, no suction. Now suction. Okay? I'm going to measure the device from the patient's nose to the earlobe. So the same as the size of the nasal airway. So I got maybe about 14. I'm going to hold that with my finger, and I'm not going to go further than that. So I don't want to insert this further than the distance from the nose to the earlobe. And so now I'm going to activate this again. I'm going to move it the same way as I did with the NCA. I'm going to stick it in, and then I'm only going to suction on the way out, kind of swirling into the spirally motion, suctioning on the way out. Does that make sense? So insert it and then activate the suction, and suction as you pull out. You can suction through an NPA. In fact, it's a common thing to do. It gets clogged with goobers. You can also suction just through a nostril that doesn't have an NPA in it. Questions?